tonight, second half of a home-and-home, Flyers and Maple Leafs. We're going to get into the game, but you mentioned that you've been out of town covering World Juniors. The U.S., spoiler alert, gold medal.
Sorry for anyone who had the game on DVR and are waiting to watch it.
We're going to talk about that later in the game.
Wait, you knew about that?
Well, intern Andrew and Bundy went to war a couple days ago, but we'll get there later on in the Press Row show today. But Adam, I think a lot of people who might have missed it or didn't get to watch as many games are curious about what the Flyers prospects looked like in the tournament. Can you kind of give folks an overview of what some of the more highly touted prospects, if there's anybody that, Cutter Gauthier had a goal in the first game, right? And then played the fewest minutes of anybody, any forward on Canada, or at least in a couple of games. Give people an update on how
they had 4 prospects there, 3 on Canada: Jet Luchenko, Oliver Bonk, and Carson Bjarnason. Carson Bjarnason was the third goalie. Excuse me, unfortunately, he didn't play. Jet Luchenko scored a brilliant shorthanded goal, really showcased his speed, did a nice job as a penalty killer. I don't think he got enough ice time to really showcase himself, but when he did, he was a real standout. And Oliver Bonk, and there's been a lot said about Canada and some coaching decisions, some roster management decisions, and Oliver Bonk was a really great example of that, because for the first 2 games, they had him at the point on the power play, and around here, we know the nickname Bumper Bonk. It has meaning to it, and apparently maybe Hockey Canada didn't get that memo because they had him at the point on the power play. Meanwhile, he doesn't play the point on the power play in London. One of his teammates does, Sam Dickinson, and Sam Dickinson was sitting on the bench watching while Canada's power play was not doing well. They moved Bonk to the bumper for the 3rd game, and on their very first power play, Oliver Bonk scored from the bumper position. If you want to know why Canada went out in the quarterfinal round for the 2nd straight year, that really is the perfect example of why. I think the kids on that team, not just the Flyers prospects, I think a lot of kids on that Canadian team played as well as they could under, a team that maybe wasn't particularly well coached, a team that had some roster issues. I think the issues that Canada had were far from the locker room. They were more higher up the food chain. The only other prospect was there.
Let me stop you there, just on the can. A lot of times, fans like to blame coaches. It's just the thing that fans do. You watch more hockey than just about anybody this side of the Mississippi, and maybe on the other side as well. How fair are the coaching critiques coming out of World Juniors this year?
100% deserving. And I talked about it with Bonk. One of the other things that Dave Cameron was the coach of that team. He said we need to get more. Our forwards need to get more inside, get more to the net. Their biggest forward was Porter Martone, the 2025 draft prospect, who was scratched for 3 games. He's at 6'3" and 200 pounds. He plays a game. Scouts have variously compared him to Corey Perry, Matthew Tkachuk. I think I might have heard Brady Tkachuk's name thrown in there, but that's the sort of vibe you get from him, right? At the time, he was second in the league second in the Ontario Hockey League in scoring. So he's not just a big bruising guy. He's a big bruising guy who can play. And you had him in the press box when you were also saying we need to get more on the inside and take goalies' eyes away from him. So when Porter Martone goes back in the lineup, the very first thing he does, get to the front of the net, score a goal. So when you're wondering about coaching, that's the best I can say.
Why does that happen? Is it just a thing where, especially at junior, maybe more so than like at the Olympics or something, you have a coach who has a bunch of young players, and is it just that the coach thinks that he knows better than every other coach who's been coaching these players that gets them into a successful enough position to be considered for World Juniors? Like, why does that happen? It seems insane that you would play these guys out of position. Is it really just an ego trip?
I don't think it's an ego trip. I think some of it is when you coach at that level, and I'll just use Dave Cameron as an example. Dave Cameron coaches the Ontario League. He knows the Ontario Hockey League players better. Now, I don't know if that's quite the answer when it comes to not knowing how best to use Porter Martone, who also plays in the Ontario Hockey League for Brampton, or Oliver Bonk, who plays in the Ontario Hockey League for London. He's coached against both of those kids before. I can't really explain some of the decisions that were made. It was confusing. It was curious at best, and not necessarily a surprise that they lose to Latvia in the shootout, which is a huge, maybe the biggest upset in 49 years of World Junior history. And it's not a surprise that they go out in the quarterfinals for the 2nd straight year, because of, these kind of situations. This is a different group, it's a different team. It's hard to compare year on year, but it was very obvious to see where their deficiencies were behind the bench and in management.
Okay, so those were the three. You touched on all three of the Flyers prospects for Canada. And there was one more.
Heikki Rahonen, who played for Finland, who, the Finns had a very good team, but they're never going to be a team that wows you with all their high-end offensive skill. But when utilized, he was really, really strong, very physical in a bottom six role. I think the best comparison I can make with the Rahonen is if you took all the good defensive elements from Sean Couturier's game, the size, the strength, the smarts, I think that's what you have in Heikki Rahonen. I don't know if he's going to develop the offensive game as Couturier has, where he's a two-time 30-goal scorer, but I think if you're looking at and projecting down the road how he could eventually help the Flyers as a third-line, fourth-line center, I think he's in that running. I think he could be that guy, maybe, and I'm talking 3-4 years from now, because he's still only 18. I don't think he's turned 19 yet. So you're projecting to the future with him. The only other player who should have been in that tournament that wasn't, unfortunately, was Jack Berglund, the center from Sweden. Broke a finger on his hand in the last pre-tournament game. Yeah. Unfortunately, he had to miss the tournament. He's going to be out 5 weeks, had surgery. But he was a guy that, going back to the summer showcase, really stood out for me from an offensive standpoint that maybe I wasn't expecting, because he's such a big, strong kid, much like Rahonen, but he knows how to get to the front end of the offensive zone, and he is an immovable object when he got there. He was fantastic, and I thought he would be – we did our pre-tournament predictions on NHL.com, and we were looking for a surprise standout player. I originally had Jack Berglund, and I very quickly had to change it when he got hurt. So –
how big of a role do you think he would have played for them had he not gotten hurt?
I think he would have been the second or third line center, but I think they would have utilized him in a different way than Finland did with Rahonen, where he was more of a penalty killer. I think they would have found a power play spot for Berglund because of his size, because of his strength.
There's one other name that came out of World Juniors that had to do with the Flyers. At least it had to do with a lot of Flyers fans who are trying to look ahead to, all right, love or hate John Tortorella, he's not the youngest coach in the league. This team has tried once before to go after a college coach. It didn't work out particularly well. But Dave Carl's name has come out a lot, at least among Flyers fans. And I think pretty much any fan base in the National Hockey League that looks at the long term. Is there any chance, maybe not just the Flyers, is there any chance that after back-to-back gold medals, is there a chance that an NHL team could look to woo him to the NHL, or do you think that it's a hard transition and it doesn't usually work out? Like, where do you think that front offices are landing on it right now?
I think I would have to guess that he was front of mind before this, going back to last year's World Juniors and an NCAA championship. He's got 2 NCAA titles. Yeah. He's got 2 gold medals. So I think he's been on the radar long before now. I think what you have is a young guy.
35?
Let's see. He was 2008 draft, and that
was 35.
That sounds about right. But he's got a couple of young kids, and he's in a very, very comfortable position. And one of the benefits that come with being a successful college hockey coach is job security. Yeah. It's not often, and again, that could change as we're entering a whole new world of college sports where the expectations are through the roof with NIL and all, and now you can kind of pull from the Canadian Hockey League clubs and guys like Michael Mesa or Porter Martone that we talked about, or Gavin McKenna. You hear their names mentioned as, well, maybe these guys can come to NCAA hockey now that the pathway is open for them. Yeah. So now there's a whole other world of recruiting you have to kind of now expand and dig into. So maybe the pressure goes up on NCAA coaches, but it's a pretty solid job if you get there and are successful. And David Carl has been nothing but successful since he's been there. But you have to remember, he was a Denver student who stayed there, became an assistant coach under Jim Montgomery, and then got the job when Montgomery went to the pros. So he is a Denver guy. Does he want to leave that? for the questionable world of the NHL. And look, as you said, we went through it with Dave Haxtell. Dave Haxtell's first answer to the Flyers was no. And it took some cajoling and convincing by Ron Hextall to get him to leave Grand Forks. Again, a guy who was uber successful at the college level, a Frozen Four team perennially. He did not have to leave. And he opted to come to the NHL and take whatever you want from that, whether you're successful, not successful, whatever. But it took a lot to get him out of there. And other college coaches have been approached. What I've been told from the college coaches that I know is the standard NHL deal for a coach is 3 years. Well, okay, so let's say you have a middling first year. Your second year maybe doesn't start off well. There's not a lot of runway after that.
Yeah.
If you want a 5-year deal, well, then you have a little bit more job security. Whether it's here, or whether it's in the NHL or elsewhere, you're still going to get a consistent paycheck until you get your next job. It's a little bit easier to make that move. So you have to have a team that's really willing to make a commitment to a guy. Not a lot of NHL teams are willing to make that kind of long-term commitment to a coach who maybe doesn't have NHL experience. So it's interesting. It's certainly a question. If you're talking X's and O's, certainly David Carl has proven his mettle that he knows how to win. Would that translate to the NHL? I'm not sure. He's never played at this level. He was on the path to being an NHL player. Unfortunately, he had a medical condition that disqualified him from playing. So he went another route. Does it get him to the NHL? It's going to be very interesting. I'm sure NHL teams are doing their due diligence as we speak.
Do you think it's more likely, I'm just going to keep pushing this button because it's fun, but do you think it's more likely that if he were going to make the jump, it would be to being an assistant at the NHL level? Or is it something where, if you're going to make that jump and you're going to leave your comfort and where you found so much success, it has to be for a head coaching job?
I would think it would have to be for a head coaching job. If he wants to be an assistant, other than a larger paycheck maybe, I don't know what the benefit of that is. Now, if you're saying would he take the equivalent of a gap year and go to the American League and kind of understand what the difference between pro hockey, similar to with players.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe that would be a little bit better, and you make him, and you let him know, hey, wink, wink, nod, nod, you're our coach in waiting. If something goes wrong with our guy at the NHL level, I don't know.
Listen, if Alexei Kolosov doesn't have to go to Lehigh Valley, why should David Carl?
I think it'll be entirely up to David Carl.
Yeah.
I think if he's comfortable at Denver, obviously he loves Denver, he loves college hockey. Maybe he doesn't want to leave. Not everybody's goal in that level is to be in the NHL. Sometimes when you're in a happy spot, happiness wins out over no matter how many zeros are on the end of your paycheck.
Though it doesn't hurt if there are enough of those zeros.
Well, again, but this goes back to Dave Haxtell, right?
Yeah.
If he had, I've never asked him this, but I wonder if he had it to do over, would he have rather stayed at North Dakota and been comfortable? He was a North Dakota student. That program, when you go to a college, you play for a college team, becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
Maybe in hindsight he would have rather stayed there.
How much does a college coach make on average?
How much you think cost of living in Grand Forks, North Dakota is? Maybe a little more expensive in Denver.
Yeah.
But again, there's never my dad. One of the things my dad taught me when I was very young: never take a job for the money, because money comes and goes. Happiness, though, is the key. So if you're happy in a place and you're happy with the people you work with, and you're constantly bringing in new players, so you don't have that long-term butting of heads, maybe you're happy right where you are.
Putting happiness before money. This holiday message is brought to you by Adam Kimelman and NHL.com.